as you guys are here, San Diego, am I right? Pretty far, right? Let's take a look at this. Here where you guys are, and I'm talking from this place, it's talking about the experience that we lived in this place, taking into consideration some of the religions and some of the culture that is based on some of the cultures of this huge continent, which is the African continent, right? And even when we say the African-based religions, it doesn't mean that it's based in this whole continent because it's so vast and also multidimensional. So sometimes you need to be careful when you say religiões de matriz africana, because the African continent is something huge. But I can tell you that it has to do a lot with this part of Africa here and this part over here as well. So this part is pretty much where many of the different cultures from the African continent traveled to this space that we now call Brazil. And those are some of the religions that we're going to be talking about today. Of course, that you already had a class about this. And I'm going to be talking more specifically about the violence that we suffer and a little bit of how we resist to that kind of violence. All right. So now let's go to the slides. Okay. The title of this speech is Religious Racism in Brazil. And I think that one of the first things we have to do is kind of try to define what is religious racism, because one of the expressions that most of people used to use here in Brazil was religious intolerance, right? Intolerância religiosa. But from a few years, probably from at least the last 5, 6, or 7 years, we already speaking about religious racism. There are different ways to define religious racism. So Dr. Daniela Gomes, for example, she's a professor at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. She defines religious racism as she says, religious racism is a form of religious intolerance or discrimination that is rooted in racialized prejudice against a particular faith or faiths. The concept of religious racism comes from Brazil, where activists, sorry, I did something wrong here, sorry, where activists where use the phrase racismo religioso to refer to the discrimination against Afro-Brazilian religions such as Candomblé and Umbanda. So in the view of Dr. Daniela Gomes, religious racism is a specific form of religious intolerance. That's a perspective that we need to consider. There are other perspectives as the one that I propose when I say that when we talk about structural racism, we have to understand that it has several dimensions. And one of these dimensions is the ways in which it will affect the religions. We understand that racism is at the base of the religious intolerance that we suffer. So the most specific, direct way, and also comprehensive, because this will touch several other aspects of Brazilian society, is when we use this term, religious racism. So in my understanding, religious racism is not a form of religious intolerance. Religious racism is one of the dimensions of structural racism. And I'm talking about this because I think that Brazil and most of the Western societies, if we cannot say all of the Western societies, they are based on racism. They are structured by racism. So if we're talking about all the nations in the Americas, all of them have been structured economically, socially, and also in terms of science, of how you understand the social values and even the cohesiveness of society. They depended a lot on slavery. And along with slavery, one of the developments we had was the idea of anti-Black racism and also the idea of anti-Blackness. So these are several different components and several different concepts that they come together when we are talking a little bit here about what we call religious racism. We're going to have time to talk a little bit about that as we proceed. So there is what we could call here a kind of the origins of Black presence in Brazil. And this picture that I share here with you is part of a website that I really like, and I think that lots of people who want to understand more about slave trade, they should visit this website, which is the slavevoyage.org. It's really deep. It has a lot of information, a lot of data. They have even the animations of the different tracks, how ships were navigating from one place to the other. They have the data of how many people were embarked in some ships, how many people actually arrived in Brazil or even in the Caribbean or even in the US. It's really complete. They talk about the nations that were controlling this slave trade across centuries. It's an exceptional work, right? And I can show you that major of the ports involved in the transatlantic slave trade, you can see that we have lots of ports here in Europe, especially in this area here of Portugal and Spain. Okay, so this Atlantic area of Europe. We have these major ports here also in the African continent. You guys remember that I was talking that some of the religions we are talking about here, most of them have lots of influence from this particular area. And you can see here the ports, the major ports involved in the transatlantic slave trade as well when we talk about the Americas, okay? But this one is also really important because it talks about the major coastal regions from which captives left Africa. And you can see this place here where is pretty much where Angola is right now. And also these spaces where we have Benin, where we have Nigeria. I think that Ghana is also in this area. Most of these that some people call the Yoruba land. That's why there is a lot of things that we talk about the Yoruba culture and how it was translated in Brazil. But let's not forget that we have also what we call here in Brazil the Bantu culture that has to do with collection of different cultures that we have in this area of Congo and this area of Angola as well. As you can see, most of the enslaved people that arrived to Brazil came from this area, actually. Although symbolically, the most dominant area is the one that has to do with the Yoruba culture, okay? And these are the ports where most of the captives disembarked. So you can see that we have the Caribbean with a lot of relevance here. In the US, not many of them, but it does not mean that we did not lots of captives here because most of the people that came to this area, first they disembarked in this area and then they were transported to the United States. And you can see here in Brazil that we have these 4 ports and how many of them we got here. This is the area that I was talking to you where I'm speaking from, Bahia, the state of Bahia and the city of Salvador. This was one of the major ports we had. That's also why we have a huge Black presence in this state. Salvador, the city where I'm speaking from right now, is considered to be probably the second blackest city in the world in terms of absolute number, because and of course, when we say these Black people, we're talking about the variety of Black people that we can have here, but it's considered to be the second blackest city in the world. So that's why also many people say that we have African culture in diaspora, or Some people also say that we find in Candomblé or in some expressions of Candomblé here in Brazil, you're gonna find Yoruba culture as it was developed in Brazil. It is as if we had a huge branch that has some small branches because of the ways in which the Yoruba culture is going to be developing in Cuba, the way that it's going to be developing in the southern USA, and the way that it's going to be developing here. And also with different connections, because we were talking about how this Yoruba culture has been developing here, and also in contact with the Ewe culture, and also in contact with the Bantu culture. So we have lots of different cultures here. And that's why when we talk about Candomblé, we do not say it's an African religion, because that's a lie. As in the same way that we cannot say that Santeria is an African religion, we cannot say that Lukumi is an African religion. They're not African religions. They are African-based religions, because they developed in this area with different translations that were necessary for those people to survive. What I do think it's beautiful is that we had to adapt lots of different things, but we kept a universe of science, a universe of things that would help us to understand the world in a way that would help us to survive according to our ancestors as well, right? So this is deeply important and deeply profound for us. And that's why we keep fighting to survive with the beliefs that we have, instead of just saying, you know what, it's so hard to have Candomblé nowadays, let me just become Christian, it's going to be easier. That's not what we want. If you want to become Christian because that's your faith, that's all right. But in our case, if our faith is about the Orisha, so let us keep worshiping Orisha, and let's be respectful with each other. That's what we are fighting for. So as I was talking to you, slavery had a lot to do with the development of the idea of racism, right? So one of the definitions that we have of slavery comes from Orlando Patterson, when he says that slavery is the permanent violent domination of naturally alienated and generally dishonored persons. This is one definition among many, but I really like this definition just because it does not reinforce forced labor as a characteristic of slavery. And I do think this is important because although forced labor, especially here in the Americas, had a lot to do with slavery, and had a lot to do with the economic development of these societies here in these nation states here in the Americas, it does not explain the condition of continuous violence that Black people are still exposed in these spaces, even after the abolition of slavery. So slavery becomes way deeper than forced labor. So in a sense, when we have the abolition of slavery, maybe we had the abolition of general forced labor that was imposed against Black people, but it does not mean that we had the abolition of slavery in the sense that we should be respected and recognized as human beings. All right, so, and I'm not saying these words as a particular insight. It comes from several authors like Saidia Hartman, like Frank Wilderson, like Hortense Spillers, and several other authors that discuss this situation of Black existence in the world, all right? And racism, on its turn, has to do with this discrimination, with this hierarchy based on the idea of race, and also the structure of oppression based on the idea of race. This idea of race, when it is applied to human beings, of course, it is limited. Of course, it does not have any kind of biological evidence or biological sustenance or support. However, it has very deep and material consequences in our social and political relations. And that's why we should not stop talking and investigating and fighting against racism. But then when we are talking about the arrival of Black people here in Brazil, we are talking about these people who arrive here, but of course that they cannot be undressed, let's say this, from their culture. They cannot have their beliefs deleted from themselves. So that's why also Black culture and Black expressive culture is also so deep and so important here in Brazil. And I'm talking again, not from a development of something that has survived and it is absolutely the same as it is in some parts of the African continent, but it's interesting to see how they developed in this part of the world. As we have, for example, the samba de roda, and as we have the capoeira, I can probably show you the web links of this, and I can send them to you if you want to, because I'm afraid. Okay, I'm already here. Can you guys have the sound? No. That's okay. That was not supposed to happen anyway. I just clicked wrongly here. But let me just get back to the slide. Because I'm not gonna play them just to make sure that we're gonna have time to talk. I'm gonna send you these links for you guys to see. Because somebody Roda is one of those social moments when people can have this social interaction, and at the same time they can have those moments of flirting, and also those moments, those moments, Kasia, when you have a problem with someone and that person is like doesn't like you, and you cannot really fight against that person. But then when you have somebody Roda, you have the moments to improvise a few forms of singing. And then in that improvisation, you put some of the information that are gonna touch that particular person, although not everybody will notice. So that person will come to the samba also, and will also respond to you as they think. So it's a civilized way of doing war without having to, to shoot, without having to punch, but with poetry. Well, it's so beautiful. In the same way as capoeira, which is a martial arts that was developed in Brazil by Black people since the 18th, at least the 18th and 19th century. Okay. And Black religiosity is also something that's so important when we talk about this culture that has been developed in Brazil based on African cultures like Candomblé and Umbanda. In the case of Candomblé, there is a variety of ways that we can talk about Candomblé, but I think that some of the characteristics that has been uh, mentioned by Dr. Gomes, I think they are really pertinent to the understanding of this. I'm just gonna, in this case, I think that I'm gonna really try to share with you, but it never goes with the sound, so forget about it. I was trying to share with you because it can help us to understand a little bit. Let me try to do something here.
Gustavo, a gente consegue ouvir o som. Se você quiser, me manda no chat que eu abro o YouTube, ou só abre seu YouTube que dá para ver.
All right, so let me try to share this. Eu vou tentar deixar aqui aberto e vou dividir a aba. Okay, I'm going to share this tab of the Google Docs, and I think it's going to work better so that you can listen better to this. Yes, share sound. Okay. Okay, so this is a demonstration a little bit for some people that do not have any kind of information about Candomblé as well, has not seen some of those images. But you can see that we have that idea of community. Everybody was preparing the party or preparing the environment for the celebration. Everybody was participating on that. And the moment that the Orisha comes is kind of the culmination of all of that, is the moment that everybody gets happy because it is as if we are talking to each other here. We have all of this, but we have our ancestors and our mythic ancestors that hopefully they will come to the Aye, they will come to Earth, and they will dance with us. They will be celebrating with us. They will be hugging us as they are blessing us. So that's the moment where kind of I used to say that's when the chronological time collapses, because we were talking about a past that we did not even know, and that past manifests itself in the present through the body of someone. And that's the moment when we kind of renew everything that we feel so that we can also have our steps to the future. So this is some things, of course, that when we go deeper on the philosophy that goes with Candomblé, with the very idea of the Odus and everything that has to do with that, with what each Orisha has to tell us. So we have lots of things to learn about that. And it's really important for us to preserve our right to keep doing what we are doing. But unfortunately, what we experience is a lot of different acts of violence against Afro-Brazilian religions. I'm not going to play these videos here. I'm just going to share the links with you. But these acts of violence have been part of the whole Brazilian history, actually. There was a time that practicing Candomblé was considered to be a crime. People were arrested for practicing Candomblé, for being part of Candomblé, as they were arrested for being part of Capoeira, as they were arrested for playing samba or dancing samba, which is a Brazilian dance that nowadays everybody talks about that. But most of Black people who actually were part of this in the early 20th century, they were arrested for that, which is one of the evidence that we were talking about, that the problem was not about capoeira, the problem was not about candomblé, the problem was not samba itself. The problem is that those were expressions of African culture in Brazil. And at that point, they understood that civilization could only be done if we were connected with the European civilizational, right? Civilization and all those values of Europe. We should not be connected with the values of African cultures in Brazil. And that's one of the reasons why Black people are so discriminated against even nowadays. I was giving an interview to a podcast these days, and in that interview, I was saying that what happens in Candomblé is a frontal challenge to the patriarchal society, especially what we could call the hetero-patriarchal society, right? Because most of Candomblé temples and most of Candomblé houses, they are led by Black women. In most of Candomblé houses, we do not have any kind of embarrassment or any kind of uh, limitation imposed against queer people. So Candomblé is one of the first religions in Brazil that actually accepts gay people, that accepts lesbians, and nowadays it's kind of way more open to everything that has to do also with trans people as well. So we are actually really facing and combating any form of violence that has to do with this patriarchal society. Okay, yeah. And one of the things that has to do with this is that we understand that this kind of violence we suffer has to do with the challenge we impose to this kind of society. So moving on, so we of course have lots of different organizations that make lots of resistance against that. And so these are some of these organizations that I can also send the links, the web links, or the Instagram profiles of these organizations so that you can take a look at them. This is the Ilha Ogun Siwaju, which is the terreiro that I am the leader. This is the Ilha Juaro, which I am a son of this terreiro. And this is the Criolla, which is a non-governmental organization that also helps us a lot. And we also have the Racing and Equality and lots of different organizations that work with us to combat these different forms of violence. Let me just describe very briefly some of these violences here. These two videos that I'm gonna send the links to you, you're gonna see these people destroying some of the sacred image or the ibas, as we say, of the orishas we have. But these people are the priests of these spaces, and they are destroying the sacred image of their own temples. And they are doing this because they are on the point of a gun, being threat to their lives, and people are obligating them to do that. And you can listen to the person saying that this is just a dialogue. Next time I'm gonna kill you. Go and take that devil from down there. So there is a lot of things involved in each one of these images that you're going to see. And hopefully we're going to have time in the future to go even deeper and talk more and more about this. Well, for now, that's what I have to share with you. And I would be happy to have some feedback so that we could talk. Thank you.